All right. Hey guys, Kimika Titi here, and today I am joined with the one and only Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. I just want to briefly introduce this incredible human being. Scott Barry Kaufman is a cognitive scientist and humanistic psychologist exploring intelligence, creativity, and the depths of human potential. He's the founder and director of the Center for Human Potential and founder of Self-Actualization Coaching. Dr. Kaufman holds a Ph.D. in cognitive psychology from Yale University and has taught at Columbia University, Yale, NYU, the University of Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. His writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Scientific American, Psychology Today, and Harvard Business Review. And he's the author and editor of over 10 books. Dr. Scott Kaufman, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yay! I have been looking forward to it for a very long time, actually. And I'm curious, just for those of you, those who are watching that have not been familiar with your work, what brought you into the field of psychology?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a long story,
Okay.
but let's see if we can really make that short. When I was really, really young, first couple years of my life, I had a learning disability, an auditory learning disability, where it was very hard for me to process things in real time. And I was put in special education because everyone thought I was stupid as a result of it. And I had wondered as early as can be why we were all being treated as though we had such low potential. And, I would really advocate for my friends and in special ed. And as I grew older and I outgrew my learning disability and I fought my way out. And it's really a whole story, which I wrote about in my book on Gifted, Intelligence
Okay.
Redefined. But I'm trying to do a long story short here. Long
Right.
story. There's so many little, parts of this story, but I fought my way out of special education to see what I was capable of. And I decided at one point that I didn't want to be labeled. I didn't want to be defined by my learning disability label anymore. And I didn't want I got a lot of special privileges as a result of it, but I didn't want the privileges. I wanted to earn things on my own merit, and really fought my way out of a system that was hard to fight out of, and I proved everyone wrong.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
fought my way to get into college. I wasn't even college bound, but
Wow.
I and wasn't even accepted in the psychology program at first. I actually went through my opera singing, and then
Whoa.
yes, at the music school, and then I transferred into psychology once I was there. Always trying to find an alternate route to get to where I want
Wow.
to go, not giving up. So, but that's a really, I was always interested in psychology. I think as young as I could be, as young as
Yeah.
I can remember, I was fascinated. I've been fascinated with individual differences, why people differ from each other in talent, creativity, intelligence, these sort of things.
And right now, what's the one thing that you notice among our social media sort of millennial Gen Z
Mhm.
age? Because it seems like you are like speaking about this, about growth, about
Yeah.
transcendence, about like self-actualization from experience. You're not just studying it as an outsider who's like had
Mm.
everything given to you, had like, you
Yeah.
know, it sounds like, okay, wait, like you're actually talking about this from experience. What do you think is the sort of primary thing holding back Gen Z and millennials in this 2020 era?
I think their mentality
Yeah.
about life, how to face and deal with life, and how to cope with life and life's many challenges. Um, you know, I resonate so much with a lot of their issues and their anxiety. I've suffered from generalized anxiety disorder my whole life. I know what it feels like to feel a constant sense of anxiety. But I think that it's really important, and we should be teaching young people. But I don't just stop at young people. We should be teaching every adults, everyone,
Right. Yeah.
to not be a victim to your emotions.
Mhm.
is how I frame it.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, I feel like, a lot of young people today are being raised in a culture of victimhood that, almost, it makes it easier for them um, to stay there as opposed to be able to learn the tools of resiliency. And at the end of the day, I think that we're really selling a whole generation short of human potential. I think that these kids have so much greater potential than they realize, greater potential for even just fundamentally being able to cope with the challenges of life.
Hmm. Do you think, so I want to tap into the word mentality a little bit, because I
Sure.
think I think we all have an idea of what a mentality is,
Mm.
but from like a cognitive scientist perspective, what is a mentality? Is it ingrained into your identity? Is it something that we can learn at any stage in life? Is it something we tap into at some part of the day or once we read a certain headline? Like, what is that word? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely the thing that you can adopt and learn and cultivate at any point in your life.
Hmm.
You know, we have personality differences, we have temperament differences, but above all of that, we can develop a way of being and
Hmm.
and a consciousness that
Hmm.
allows us to have the worldview, um, way modes of thinking about our future and how to acquire our goals and the skills. All these things are encompassed in a mentality, in a what I call an empowerment mentality. That's what I'm trying to get
Mm.
people to, is an empowerment mindset, from a
Right.
passivity mindset to an empowerment mindset. But I think it's something that anyone can cultivate. I mean, I think that the great humanistic psychologist Viktor Frankl,
Mm.
who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, um, I mean, he tried to cultivate an empowerment mindset even within the Holocaust. So
Right.
I don't think that anyone can ever use their environmental circumstance as an excuse to not work toward an empowerment mindset. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for laying that out. So you mentioned a passive mentality as opposed to an empowerment mentality. What
That's
does
where
a
that's the framework I'm trying to create. Yeah, yeah, is to go.
gotcha?
That's the I want people to go from a passivity mindset to an empowerment
Right.
mindset. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, a passivity mindset is one that is grounded in learned helplessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the field of psychology has studied this trait that you can acquire through repeated failures or repeated sense of not being able to overcome something, and you
Mm-hmm.
get to a certain point where even if the thing that you want is available to you, you no longer see it.
Right.
You don't, it's like the dogs don't leave the cage when the cage is eventually open,
Uh-huh. Yes. That's insane.
because they've been shocked so many times.
Right. Yeah. And would you say that our culture, our economic like setup rewards that passivity mindset more than it does the empowerment mindset?
I
Because
think
I
so.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you think so? Do you think so as well?
I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I personally, I've gone through a journey. For anyone who's watching this, and maybe you're not familiar with like my story, I went through a journey of moving from Africa to the US, and to a degree, through college, through education, through general ed classes, learning an outlook on life that would kind of align with what you describe as that passivity mindset. A lot of events I would process as happening to me and me not having any power about it. I
Yeah.
would kind of break everything down into microaggressions and therefore feel that based on my identity as a Black woman, like I can't, move past whatever oppression was coming my way.
Yeah.
In that season, I think I had a lot more. There was a lot of compassion thrown my way in certain aspects. Not that it really helped me internally, but I think there was a lot more like acceptance, maybe like opportunities. But the moment I started to sort of speak up about what you would describe as kind of being more empowered and having that empowerment mentality, it's like, oh, I don't think you want to really talk about yourself not experiencing oppression, because that's not in alignment with the narrative you should be adhering to.
Hmm.
So yeah, in my experience, I would say to a degree that's true. But I was just curious from your like research perspective, um, if it's like if there is such a huge reward for that. Anyway, thank you. I want to transition into a very interesting topic, at least interesting to me, which is
Hmm.
vulnerable narcissism.
Yeah.
In in Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman's words, how would you define narcissism?
Oh well, the there's a core. There are so many different types of narcissism that exist, but the core threads that run through all of them are self-focus, excessive self-focus,
Right.
and entitlement.
Aha. Okay.
Now, a sort of it now it's a now it's a pervasive sense of entitlement. So that has a particular meaning in the psychological literature. Psychological entitlement, it's pervasive sense of entitlement. So it's almost acontextual. So it's
Hmm.
wherever this person goes, whether it's the Starbucks line or it's
Yeah.
the airplane waiting line, or I don't know why all my examples are lines.
Lines
But
are tough to be in.
these people tend to come out in those situations though. But,
Facts. Yeah.
but, whatever it is, there's this sort of this way of being, and so it tends to be those sorts of things. But there are actually so many different types of narcissism that psychologists have discovered in recent years.
Right. And do you think the sort of lay person interest in narcissism is extreme? Do you think, like, people who aren't psychologists are maybe too fascinated by the topic, or do you think it is a fascination that is in alignment with how like peculiar this disorder is?
Well, I want to say something along those lines. It has been proposed that the two words of the year are narcissism and trauma.
Oh
Which
yeah.
is why I coined the term trauma narcissism.
Whoa.
I know. I don't know if we're ready for that yet. I don't know.
Oh wow, that is,
But
yes.
yeah. So that's, uh, right now that those are the two words of the year.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone on social media is talking every day their stories about how much trauma they've had in their life or the narcissist in their life.
Yes.
Those two things is what everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
And so it's something very much in the culture right now. It's very much in the zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fully understanding and wrap our head around why, a big cause, could be the book "The Body Keeps the Score," which
Ooh.
was became such a runaway bestseller and entered and changed the consciousness. So now everyday nuisance, I should say, is
Mm-hmm.
now framed as a trauma. Um, you
Mm.
know, and yes, I mean I can go on and on and on, but I feel like I just let me pause because I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so you mentioned there are many types of narcissism, and then there's this particular, I guess, form of narcissism that is vulnerable narcissism. Um, and the reason I was fascinated by it is because in other podcasts that I have seen you talk about it, also you did talk about it on the Dr. Phil show, which I saw that clip. It was very enlightening. Um, what is unique about vulnerable narcissism? What are some key traits regarding it, and why? How should I say this? Why is it particularly captivating um, a certain reaction, if that makes sense?
Wait, what kind of reaction?
Like that, it is sort of the form of narcissism that is most culturally celebrated, because it capitalizes on that word, like trauma. Um, so I'm curious to see how to what it is that makes it so special, unique, and maybe culturally ignored. Whereas a lot of people will say, "Oh, grandiose narcissism, that's terrible. Malignant narcissism, that's terrible." But vulnerable narcissism does not really get a spotlight because I think right now culture tends to reward it. Um, in my sort of layperson opinion.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. The idea of rewarding something. Um, let's think that through. Let's unpack that in a really nuanced way.
Right.
Um, what you are seeing, there are a lot of people who are legitimately suffering. Their own subjective experience is they are facing a lot of anxiety these days, a lot of Jonathan Haidt, my colleague, a social psychologist, calls it the anxious generation. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of, and I think that being able to see lots of examples of other people who are being vulnerable and there is a big relief, and there's something that feels good about being
Yeah.
vulnerable and being able to tell, you told me your story, right?
Yeah.
I told you my story.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, so, there is something that, is being, is allowing a lot of people to, open up about their own unique suffering. That's not necessarily vulnerable narcissism. And I
Yeah.
think that can actually be a good thing. I think that the more that we listen to each other's pain and suffering and acknowledge other people's expressions of hurt, that's ultimately good for society.
Yes.
What vulnerable narcissism is something a little bit different. It's where we start to get into the victimhood Olympics,
Mm-hmm.
where we get into our silos of suffering and we lose empathy for the suffering of others, especially those who may appear very different than ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
or those that we've deemed to be in our out group in some way, whether it's politically or it's, I mean, there's so many different ways you can nowadays, you can view someone as not in your in group. And
Yeah.
when things get really tribal in that way, and you start to feel you start to feel low empathy for others. Actually, I can tell you
Mm-hmm.
the 4 characteristics of
Yeah.
people who it's literally in the psychology literature called a tendency for interpersonal victimhood. Uh,
Mm.
and I'm actually working on a large scale study right now correlating that with vulnerable narcissism. So I think both of them are almost identical. But our
Interesting.
data hasn't found that. No one's actually made the link between the 2 traits yet, but I'm working on it. But
Gotcha.
the 4 characteristics of TIV, or tendency for interpersonal victimhood, is a sense of moral elitism, a sense that because I've suffered, I can't do any wrong.
Oof.
So that's the number 1. Number 2 is constantly seeking and, I would say, demanding recognition of one's victimhood, even in
Mm-hmm.
contexts where it's not even appropriate. Like, let's say you're at a funeral and someone just stands up and says, "Yeah, I don't care about the funeral. You all need to recognize that I have experienced racism." It's like, wait, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't the appropriate time to bring up
Right.
your. Okay,
Right.
my examples tend to be absurd, but
It paints the picture very clearly.
did I make the point? Did I make the point? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
3, lack of empathy for the pain and suffering of others. So saying, "Look, you don't know what I've been through. I've suffered so much. I don't need to care about you."
Mm, mm, mm.
And then the 4th one is frequently ruminating about past victimization, and that tends to cause suffering to the person. So
Right.
they can't seem to stop thinking about it. And so psychologists distinguish between productive rumination and unproductive rumination, and they tend to show a lot of unproductive rumination. It's not leading anywhere. It's not leading
Mm-hmm.
to any growth.
Right.
So I just want to be clear that what I'm referring to has those 4 qualities.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great thing to be in communities where you're sharing your
Yeah.
your lived experiences. You're sharing I loved listening to your story. It touched
Thank you.
me, and I
Thank you.
was able to tell you my story, and you were able to show empathy for my story.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's a different sort of ball of wax than what we're talking to. So I think it's important to have
Yeah.
that kind of nuance, because
Right.
you see a lot of people, on certain, it gets all political. Some people will immediately dismiss someone's pain as like, "Oh, that's the woke left." It's like,
Yeah.
wait, no, that person's just telling you how much they're suffering. It's like,
Right.
have a little compassion.
Right.
A little compassion goes a long way. So
Absolutely.
I think in this kind of discussion, it's important to distinguish between these various levels of nuance.
Right. There's a Speaking of nuance, there's a question I even have regarding that political divide. Um, I sense that like there's social media companies that are raking in billions. They're
That's true.
almost absolutely controlling our stream of media.
Mhm.
And in a sense, I can have sympathy for, say, if I am more for the kind of capitalism structure and argument, just me personally.
Mm.
But I can have even sympathy for the fact that as capitalist structures benefiting from capitalism, I don't know if any of this makes sense, but they're also pulling on this like emotional thing where they're incentivizing like clicks and likes and hearts on people participating in like the victim Olympics. Um, I say all that to say that it's not necessarily like the left or right who is like, has their hands clean or who is absolutely like in the muck and mire. I personally think this is something that doesn't discriminate, whether
No.
you're, you know, blue or red. Um, Apart from the four characteristics you shared, what are some ways that
What color are
people?
independents?
Oh, that's a good question.
Are they just white?
I think they're gray.
Gray. Oh, me no, gray. Good. That's better. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I also wanted to ask, what would you, for vulnerable narcissism,
Yeah.
is this something you mentioned? Mindset can be taught, mentality
Mhm.
can be taught.
Mm.
Is this something that can be taught? I've heard a lot
Oh
of.
yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
You,
At what point
what
do
have you
you?
heard? What have you heard? Tell me what you've heard.
So for narcissism generally, I'm always on these YouTube streets watching, every video on narcissism. I think it's fascinating. A lot of them say it starts from childhood. That it has something to do with trauma that is rooted in your childhood. Is that true, or am I in too deep on these YouTube streets?
So there's just so much to unpack there.
Okay.
You brought up the word trauma.
Oh no.
Um, what we had to understand is that everything in life is a mix of nature and nurture.
Mm,
Everything. You have a lot of people who have a certain set of genes that don't make them as sensitive to their environment and may have gone through the same exact experiences in life as someone with the genes that cause them to be temperamentally more sensitive to everything that they experience in their life, who then are more likely to create a trauma narrative around
mhm,
it. So we have to understand trauma is also just a narrative. Okay. There's
mm,
no part of the brain that's the trauma, that becomes unlocked after an experience. It's
yeah.
about your interpretation of what you experienced. You can always reframe an
Wow.
experience in a different way. Always.
Wow.
This idea that the body keeps the score, right?
Yeah.
Like, is some sort of way of erroneously separating the body from the brain. The mind and body are deeply, deeply intertwined. And it turns out that if we cognitively process what has happened to us and frame it in more empowerment oriented ways, our body changes, our nervous
Wow.
system changes. So this idea that like the body just passively keeps the score, there's nothing you can do about it, is actually bad
Mm,
science.
that's I I believe that. I definitely believe that. When I had adopted a mindset that I would say was more I had this like victim, I guess victim is the word I would use in this situation.
Mm,
I had to sort of, I don't know a lot about biology, but I had a sort of like response to every single act of microaggressions. And the more I leaned into forgiveness personally over a year or so, that changed dramatically. And so I do think you're absolutely right. Like I haven't been the same as I was back then. Um, so you're saying vulnerable narcissism, you can absolutely tap into that, like at any point in life? Just like you can also, can you tap out of it?
Well, I want to make something clear. There is no tapping in or tapping out process.
Right.
These processes take time and work. There are people with recognized, so something that might be useful here is the distinction between um, the event itself, the traumatic event. There are things that we um, all can agree are traumatic events: abuse, sexual abuse, right, physical abuse, um, uh, combat vets who've been through certain things. So there are things that are traumatic events, but then there's the trauma reaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the trauma narrative that we've told. So these are two separate things.
Got it.
Not
Okay.
everyone who experiences a traumatic event becomes traumatized by it, right?
Yes, that's right.
There's also
Okay.
nothing wrong. There's no victim blaming here. There's nothing wrong with you if
Mm-hmm.
you did interpret it as a traumatic. If you were traumatized by something, of course, we need compassion for that. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's. I just want to make clear that all this is a process. So people with PTSD, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
um, our research shows that it's possible to simultaneously have post-traumatic stress disorder and work toward post-traumatic growth.
Uh-huh.
These
Yeah.
things can coexist at the same
Got it.
time. I'm directly
Right.
responding, by the way, to B.A in the comments on YouTube. This is the point I'm trying to make,
Mm. Oh,
because
yeah.
BA made a good point. Even though it
Uh-huh.
was critical of what I was saying, that's why I want to clarify what I'm saying, because I really appreciate BA chiming in.
Yeah.
It is possible. I want to be very clear. It's possible to go through PTSD and also at the same time process the traumas and process things in a more productive way through note, for instance, having a notebook and just writing about your emotions 5 to 10 minutes a day,
Mm.
and writing about the meaning around the event and finding a newfound meaning, and how it has changed you, and how you
Mm-hmm.
want to be changed moving forward, and how you want to grow. There are things you can actively do. And what I mean by the passivity mindset is someone who maybe has experienced trauma and was traumatized by it, and they somehow are committed to staying in that uh, prison, that mental prison, their entire lives. Because I want
Mm-hmm.
to be very clear, there are things you can work on every day,
Absolutely.
little by little, to slowly help you get out of that mental prison. But it's not an on-off switch, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I really do believe in the potential for growth, and I will stand by that statement.
Right. That's great. And thank you for clarifying that. I think of the word when you say we can have incidents happen to us
Mm.
and we have an ability to react to that. I'm thinking of the word resilience kind of fitting into there.
Yeah.
Is that something that's like correct to say, like that is what you would define resilience as?
Um, I don't know what resilience is. In a lot of ways, it's just literally your ability to bounce back
Mm-hmm.
from an environmental stressor.
Mm-hmm.
But post-traumatic growth, which I was just mentioning, is something that is not only bouncing back, but actually growing from the
Oh,
experience.
right.
So this emerging field, which I wrote about a lot in my most recent book, Choose Growth,
Mm-hmm.
is all about choosing, regardless of what has happened to you, you make the conscious choice that you're going to grow from it,
Yeah.
and that you're not, and ultimately, and I'm going to say this very slowly because I want this to sink in. At
Mm-hmm.
some point, you have to give up all hope for a better past.
Oof.
I
That's
That's why I said it very slowly, because I really really needs to sink in for
wow.
people,
Yeah.
because that is just the fact of the matter.
That is very brilliantly articulated. At some point, you have to give up hope for a better past.
That's right, and I wanna give
Man.
credit to, one of my mentors. I'm looking for his book right now, who came up with that, and that's the great
Mm,
existential psychotherapist Irving Yalom, who's
uh-huh.
now 93, 93 or something years old. But
Wow.
he wrote The Gift of Therapy, among other seminal books in our field, and that's from him. But I say it
Mhm.
all the time. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. And so I think we're kind of in the ballpark talking about the mindset of victimhood. And I think you said that the tendency for interpersonal victimhood can also be somewhat interchangeable with some traits of vulnerable narcissism. Did I get that correct, or am I mixing up?
You're absolutely right. I think they're almost
Okay.
the same trait, but
Okay.
we're trying to show we haven't we're just collecting the data. So,
Gotcha.
but there must be, at least
Hmm.
conceptually, there's a huge overlap
Yeah.
between the traits of vulnerable narcissism and the traits.
Yeah.
But I think there's also might be what we might find is that it might be actually mixed. You might actually see a lot more You might also see a bunch of grandiose narcissistic traits associated with a tendency for personal victimhood, because there's
Mm,
also that more extroverted, outwardly constantly seeking one's victimhood. Those
yeah.
who score high in vulnerable narcissism tend to be more introverted. That's why
Hmm.
some people call it closet narcissism.
Mm,
They tend to not be very assertive, but they ruminate all the time about how they deserve more things without
hmm.
actually going out there and doing anything to get along the lines of what a normal human would do to obtain those things. Like
Hmm.
sitting there and dreaming about, like, oh, I should be famous or I should be rich, and resenting others, but not actually doing anything
Right.
that would
Hmm.
that people that so anyway.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think um this is a word that has fascinated me recently. Besides resilience, I asked some of my Instagram folks, also YouTube folks. So if you are tuning in today and you saw this little poll, I'm fascinated by the concept of shame because I feel like I keep finding this word everywhere. That I look up, narcissism or attachment styles, even looking into like introversion, extroversion, there it somehow always stems back to shame. Is this a reality? Is this another reason why maybe there's say for someone who is like, I don't want to put myself out there. I want people to just give me, like, you have to fix me, you have to help me. Um, does that come down to shame? Is that
Well,
a valid
you
word?
won't be surprised to hear me say nothing comes down to any one thing. But I will say that
Right.
that vulnerable narcissism is strongly, strongly correlated with the emotion of shame.
Hmm.
Strongly correlated.
Okay.
And it's one of its most strongest correlations, in fact. So,
Wow.
the idea there is that people who score high in grandiose narcissism, they tend to score low in shame. They tend to have no
Okay.
shame.
Wow.
I mean, they tend to walk around with this puffed up, like, I'm entitled to everything because of my inherent superiority.
Hmm.
Am I doing a good job?
Right.
Am I doing a good job of
That feels very superior. Yes.
But people who score high in vulnerable narcissism, and those are the ones that tend to end up on the therapist couch.
Uh-huh.
It
Okay.
tends to be more an internalizing disorder versus an externalizing disorder.
Oof.
So internalizing, they're really suffering at their own hands, because they tend to have a lot of grandiose fantasies that most of us have. It's
Mm,
perfectly normal and human, but they may have grown up, and this is where the developmental antecedents come in. A lot of people who score high in vulnerable narcissism, maybe when they were much younger, they were taught that every time they expressed a need, it got shot down in some way. So they
okay.
cried and the parent ignored them,
Yeah.
or they whatever it was. So they started to develop a shame for expressing basic normal human needs,
Hmm.
and express particularly expressing ambition.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot we can do to help people with vulnerable narcissistic traits. I think we can have a lot of compassion for it. In fact, I would be in favor of renaming it. So the word narcissism
Mm,
carries such a
yes.
negative connotation to the person, and that's not helping the person at all by labeling them as a narcissist. I would
Hmm.
actually rather rename it in some way. I feel like the
Hmm.
field of psychology needs a new name for it. I've thought of, like,
Hmm.
vulnerable preoccupation, but I don't think that
Wow. Yeah.
really I don't think that really gets at it either in a compassionate way. But
Yeah.
whatever it is, there is a phenomenon, right, where the person um, does feel shame for their grandiose fantasies, so they keep it all inside, but they also start to get more and more resentful
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
others, and that's so tragic
Right.
because because we all are capable of great potential, and
Hmm.
the more we keep this stuff inside and the more we start to develop these self-defeating mindsets and behaviors, the less likely we are to realize those grandiose fantasies.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Thank you again for breaking that down. Um, I'm also curious, uh, with like the tendency for interpersonal victimhood and what we'll call, just for the sake of this conversation, because I understand you want to like make it a more compassionate label,
Humanize it. Humanize it.
humanize it.
Yeah.
Is I read in the Scientific American piece that you wrote a couple years ago,
Mm.
that there is a tendency for revenge among individuals who exhibit these traits. Um, is that something you think in our current day and age gets confused for justice, a justified
Hmm.
sense of justice for an actual wrong that was committed, and how do we differentiate between revenge and justice with this being, a disorder?
What a great and complex question, because the tendency for interpersonal victimhood, that's the technical name for it in the field,
Hmm.
is correlated with lower levels of forgiveness in
Wow.
one's
Yeah.
daily life. Now that is a prominent correlation in the psychological literature, but what we're talking about here is an interpersonal tendency. We're
Hmm.
talking about almost acontextually. This way of being or this personality is that they have a personality that doesn't forgive across
Hmm.
many situations in their life, and that's what
Hmm.
I'm talking about. I think
Yeah.
that perhaps we need to be really careful in distinguishing that from people who face a monumental injustice in their
Yeah.
life
Wow.
legitimately
Right.
and are fighting for that injustice to be rectified. Isn't That's important. It's important to seek justice
Yeah.
when you have faced a really um, terrible thing. I think that we
Hmm.
all, as not just not just for the individual, as a community, to band together as a community. I certainly would rather live in a society where we all care deeply about injustices and help people, and are aware of it when it happens, being
Hmm.
aware of it. Now, me saying that, some people say, "Well, that sounds woke." But I think that's
Right.
part of the problem, is
Yeah.
that now this call like, now anything that, if anyone talks at all about an injustice, people will paint them as woke. I like to say I'm progressive, but not woke, you know?
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that we need to, and I really believe in caring about injustice where it happens, but I define woke as viewing everything through that lens, and I don't view
Yeah.
everything in every situation through that lens.
Mm.
So how can we
Yeah.
distinguish between the trait and the legitimate state of injustice that people may go through, that
Hmm.
rightly so, as we shouldn't allow as a society for something to happen? Like if some innocent homeless person walks down the street and let's say they get attacked, beaten, and killed by a mob um, of just horrible humans, right? Um, we shouldn't. It's not woke for me to say that was wrong.
Exactly. Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the person who maybe might be like watching this, maybe it's a snippet or the full live stream, you're saying that it is possible to to accept that the past is the past, like like a slight that has happened against you, we can't undo that, and it is also a separate and possible thing to seek justice for that, and um you know actually say that this was a wrong action. We will try to remedy it. Because oftentimes, whenever, say, I talk about my story, the two get confused as,
Mhm.
forgetting the past or forgiveness is saying it wasn't as bad as it was. But are you saying that they are two separate things, like the internal processing of the event, choosing to no longer ruminate, and then seeking justice for where things actually went wrong? Those can be two separate
Yeah,
things,
what
right?
I'm saying is that is a call for us to hold lots of seemingly contradictory things in our head at one time, which might be an
Yeah.
impossible task for some
Yeah.
humans.
Right. Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
the way I think about this is I'm a cognitive scientist, but I'm a humanistic psychologist.
Hmm.
And as a humanistic psychologist, I really want to hold all the messiness of the full complexity of being human,
Yeah.
and not reduce people. So
Right.
the idea, so on the one hand, I think that we need a lot more grace and forgiveness for human perfections in our society today.
Yeah.
I think that we need that within ourselves, so we don't have so much perfectionism within ourselves, but
Hmm.
also with others, and
Yeah.
and be able to hold our own fullness, humanness, and but also hold the full humanness of others. So that's the one hand, is we need a lot more grace and forgiveness in our society.
Yeah.
But then secondly, a point I made today is, eventually, to move forward with our lives, we need to not hold on to our past as the factor that is holding us back. To
Hmm.
ultimately move on with our lives, we do have to give up hope for a better past. Ultimately, it doesn't mean we forget our past. So
Yes.
that's the other thing I want us to hold in our head at the same time. Is it
Yeah.
doesn't mean we forget our past, and it doesn't mean that we don't fight for a better future for
Yeah.
ourselves and others.
That's
But
good.
then lastly, I don't see any of these things as incompatible. There are some people
Right.
that are there's some people committed to seeing things as incompatible when they don't have to be. And I would
Mm.
add one extra layer of complexion in this, and that's, it's still possible with all this to have loving kindness for
Yeah.
your enemies, for your enemies.
Absolutely.
I
Well said.
practice I practice metta regularly. One of my
Mm.
dearest friends is Sharon Salzberg, who is one of the legends who brought metta to the West.
Mm.
And I will meditate. So if someone makes me really mad, it happens. People suck
Yeah,
sometimes.
they do.
I mean, I suck sometimes, right? But I'm saying, if someone, makes me mad, or I feel jealousy, or I feel like I've been wronged, you know, I'll meditate
Hmm.
on my love for that person, and
Hmm.
how I wish that they would be able to, that whatever they have done is certainly an indication that they're not well.
Mm. Yeah.
And in fact, if we wish for that person that they get well, we're actually making a wish for a better society and a better world, right? Because
Right.
it's only a net positive for that person
Right.
to, you have an angry, antagonistic, hostile human going around being angry and hostile. That's not good for society.
Yeah.
Clearly, they're not mentally well. Clearly, that's not a wellness indicator. you know,
Exactly. Yeah. That's
so
so good.
holding all these things in mind at one time is what I'm all about. But I don't think that a lot of people are committed to taking these seeming contradictions and integrating them.
Yeah. It's hard. But again, well said, well laid out. Um I think it couldn't be better phrased. That
Thank you.
it is a lot of complexities at once. Kale asks a very interesting question. If we stop using the word victim for a year, would humanity be worse or better?
Honestly, well, first of all, I really want to give a shout out. I've been following the comments, and like
Yeah,
your community are the people that follow you. I mean, I adore them.
they're
I don't know any of them
awesome. They're
before
awesome.
today. I didn't know any of them before today, but I am
Yeah.
really deeply impressed with their, but it goes to show, don't judge a book by its cover. The name
Yeah.
Thunder Duck, like I'm incredibly impressed with the nuance and intelligence of Thunder Duck. So
Yes.
anyway, so there's, it just goes to show, don't ever judge someone by their username or whatever.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so okay, but just going to that question from KL, um, that's the thing is, is I don't know if it's a good thing to use the phrase victim mentality. That's what I'm struggling with right now. Is it might be better for us to not use terms that connote that we're somehow downplaying the experience that someone is having.
Yeah.
So I do see the phrase victim mentality being weaponized by the right a
Yeah.
lot right now as a way to immediately dismiss anyone who complains on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't like getting political, and I'm not getting even political with what I'm saying. I'm just making an observation
100%.
that I see this happening a lot,
Yeah.
and I don't like it.
Me neither.
I don't like reducing anyone to a single characteristic. I don't want to do it to the right. I don't want the right to do it to the left. I don't want to do
Yeah.
it to anyone.
Right.
So, I think that it might be, there actually maybe it might be a positive good. I'm struggling with that because I use the phrase victim mentality, and I'm thinking maybe I need to not do that. So, hey, I'm in the process of thinking deeply about all this stuff as well.
Right. Such a good question. I also, I struggle with trying to find the words without using certain terms that have been co-opted by certain movements. But yeah, I think I love what Katie says, survivor and victor might
Mm.
be other good words maybe to use. Let me see if anyone has any finalizing questions. Feel free to drop them in the comments. I want to leave with just one question, one last question, as we'll get a few questions from these people who I must say I learn a lot from the people who follow this channel.
Hmm.
There's always such insight and such deep interaction with an idea that I
Mm.
learn a lot from 100%. So algorithms and identity. This is a very open-ended question, but do you think algorithms and social media today are affecting our identities? And is this a matter of like life and death?
To your former question, yes, 100%. It's affecting.
Yeah.
It's scrambling our minds. I mean,
Yeah.
the algorithm is. I mean, look, I said this when I was. This sounds pretentious, but when I was having my chat with Oprah,
Oh, nice.
for a course we taught together, I said,
Oh, wow.
"Where you put your life, where you put your attention, is where you put your life," is what I said, and
Mm,
Oprah loved that quote. She's like, "Stop, stop." Yes,
that
yes.
is.
So, and I really believe that's the case, and I don't think we really fully realize how much the algorithm is 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 influencing where we put our life. And this stuff
Hmm.
matters. I
Yeah.
got off Twitter, by the way. I'm off
Oh, yeah.
because
Me too.
I'm
Yeah.
done. I'm done because I I see what's happening. I'm not
Oh,
stupid.
yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
stupid. I don't want it to happen. I see what's happening, and I don't want to be a part of it. I opt out
100%.
of being influenced. Life is too short. Life
Thank you.
is too short. You can decide, do you want to ruminate and be so angry over that person who just said that microaggression to you, or do you want to spend time with your family? You'd be like, you know what? I would
Exactly.
rather, you can really decide. And that's not saying that you're not saying that what happened to you didn't wasn't important, but you are in control of what is important to you and what isn't important to you.
Exactly. Exactly. Man, I just to the last comment, I just want to say like woke is a very interesting term.
It is. It is.
I've noticed that a lot of people tend to have the strongest reaction towards the idea of wokeness, who are almost the furthest away from it. There's a certain fear of the unknown that takes place when you see like videos of reactions to like woke TikToks.
Yep.
There's a deep fear, and it's kind of a fear of the unknown. As someone who has, I would say, been steeped in the mindset of wokeness, have been a part of movements, social justice movements, organizations that take the brands and just wave that flag. I'm not as afraid because these are people that I know. I know people who have
Yeah.
spearheaded certain definitions of gender. and it's not as scary as we make it out to be. The
Mhm.
definitions get lost and maybe kind of get are you familiar with the term concept creep?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. We use that in
Yeah.
psychology. We use that phrase.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like even the word woke has undergone its own kind of concept
Oh,
creep to
yeah.
mean way more than it actually, I think the worst of it is. But yeah, again,
That's
like with, yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't mean to
Oh, no,
interrupt you.
no. Go ahead. Go
But
ahead.
I agree. I think that the term has changed in meaning so much, once it's become so politicized. But if we go by the original definition of woke, count me in, and then I'm woke. The
Right.
original definition is just, how can you increase even a little bit your awareness of the injustices around you, and
Mm-hmm.
also the awareness of, are you contributing to systems of injustice? Now, I
Mm-hmm.
hear myself saying that, and I'm like, well, that sounds so woke. but
Oh,
but
no.
but but as a conscious human being with compassion, what is wrong with being a bit more aware of whether or not you're contributing to systems of oppression? Like, that
Yeah.
should just be called, okay, that's just being called a good human being.
Yeah. Right.
So so by
Absolutely.
the original definition of it,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm woke. It was like, I
Right.
care when the people are suffering around me. Sorry,
Yeah.
not sorry. Sorry, not sorry. And I
Man.
shouldn't, and people shouldn't have to feel shame for caring about the suffering of others. It's just, it's gotten to the point.
Oof.
It's really gotten to the point, which I think is absurd, that, like, anyone now who just at all expresses that they feel like something's not right, like, regarding the way that someone, and especially if race or gender comes into it, that
Yeah.
is like a trigger to someone to immediately
Mm-hmm.
dismiss what you're saying immediately. Like, you now to the point, even if you just bring up anything relating to race or gender, I'm
Yeah.
saying that's what we've become to in our society. That's what we've come to,
Yeah.
which is really tragic in a way, because it
Absolutely.
it doesn't allow any nuance in the conversation at
Mm-hmm.
all, at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I there's a lot there is a whole like tirade I could go on. But I just
I'm awake
again,
but not woke. I agree. I'm with Katie and I'm with Sheila.
right.
I
Yeah.
At least as it's
100%.
defined, at least as woke is now, whatever it's become, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm awake. I wanna be
Yeah.
awake. That's what I'm a Buddhist. Look,
Mm,
at the end of the day, that's what the Buddha was all about, was
I hear
waking.
you.
What does it mean to wake up, right?
Yeah.
I practice that every day of my life. I practice, what does it mean to be an awake human? But the thing
Hmm.
is, and this is where it might get controversial, my friend.
Uh-oh.
To me to me, being fully awake means you don't view everything through the lens of race and gender.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
where I start to say that I'm awake, not woke, because
Hmm.
I include race and gender within my realm of what I care about and when it comes to stuff.
100%.
But when I
Yeah.
said earlier, I don't view everything through that lens, to me, being awake means actually trying to reduce your bias as much as possible in life, not
Oof.
increase your bias. So to me, being awake, from a Buddhist perspective, is every interaction you have with your fellow human, you try to make sure that you beginner's mind. I
Yeah.
came to this conversation with you today, beginner's mind. Let
Mm.
me find out who Kimmy is, what she's all about.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what being awake means. But
Absolutely.
some people view it differently, I guess.
Yeah. There's so much I could talk about, but I'm just really honored for your time, and just every bit of information that you have shared has been a gem. So thank you so much, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. I dropped a link below in the description if you guys want to check out his latest book,
Thank
Choose
you.
Growth. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great day, and I will talk to you very, very soon. Any final words, Doctor?
It's funny you called me doctor. Well, it sounds so formal. No, I absolutely love talking to you, and I hope we can keep up the conversation. Yeah,
Absolutely. All
yeah.
right. Bye
Thank
for
you.
now, everyone, and see you later.
Thanks for listening in.